Every voice trying to win the moment. Nobody listening to the ground. I wanted space, not distance from reality. Distance from the noise, pretending to be reality. I stepped off the treadmill, left the shouting behind. No flashing banners in my head, just space to think and time. They sell you urgency, they sell you fear. Every voice is louder, but nothing's clear. I don't listen to what's promised, I watch what happens. I don't follow tone, I follow patterns. No borrowed fear, no rented rage, just facts moving across the page. Watch the bills, choices form. Watch who bends, watch who storms. Signals matter, noise is cheap. What they say versus what they keep. This is Sane in Colombia, where the volume comes down. No talking points, no marching sound. I don't chase the noise, I don't rent my mind. I step back far enough to see the design. Coffee on the table, mountains in the frame. Thinking for myself, that's how I stay sane. Living sane in Colombia.
Good morning and welcome to my personal channel. Sane in Colombia, I don't even know if that fits, but it's what I got. So today, for my own personal reasons, my own documentation, you may know, if you pay attention at all, that I've been working on my life book, my autobiography, for many years now, actually. And I thought I would be done last month, but I got kind of stalled and it's just been hanging out there. Plus, I keep finding things that are kind of interesting by accident because, you have to prod your memory, either by accident, which is what I'm going to talk about today, or just sit down and really try to plod through and map out the life that you've had. It's amazing how much you forget. But today, I'm going to talk about, because it's easy for me to then convert what I talk about into written word, and then I can just edit it. I want to talk about my time in the Marine Corps in the second half of 1976. It actually runs into early 77, but we'll talk about the last 4 months of 76 is really the key here. And you have to keep in mind that I'd already been in the Marine Corps for 4 years at this point, where I'm going to start the story today. I'd already been in the Marine Corps for 4 years. I'd re-enlisted a year prior to what I'm going to talk about today. And I had been an E5 sergeant for almost 2 years at this point. In a nutshell, I went in the Marine Corps and I ended up with an aviation guarantee. I wanted to have air traffic control, but all the crew chiefs were being killed in Vietnam. So everybody, whatever school they had, didn't matter. We all went into air crew training. And from there, I was sent to New River, North Carolina, to learn how to repair GE-58 turboshaft jet engines, basically. So you sit on your little stool and you got the jet engine on a stand and you're taking it apart and you're replacing blades and whatever it is. Basically, you're rebuilding jet engines. And so 6122 was my MOS number. And so I did that for a while. And then they switched me to the airframe, the helicopter itself. And that was 6112. And so there was that. And then I got crew chief training, 61, 72, I think it was. So I became a crew chief. And so I'd been a crew chief for well over a year at that point. I don't recall exactly when. And the year before was, we'll say it was quite exciting, because the year before was Operation Frequent Wind. And you probably know that as the Vietnam airlift. And so I was stationed off of Iwo Jima, the LPD, the Marine Corps helicopter aircraft carrier. It's like a small World War II size carrier, but it was just helicopters. And so from there, we flew off to do the various operation assignments and come back on the. So, it was quite a year. 1975 was quite a year. And so early 76, things were kind of mellow. As a matter of fact, after Frequent Wind, they sent me back to the United States. And they sent me to California, HMT 301. It was a training squadron. Although I wasn't there for training, I was there to be just a squadron NCO. And my job was to be the crew chief for the presidential helicopters. The CH-46s in California, the presidential helicopters, there's actually a whole bunch of them. The ones you see on TV all the time out of Washington, D.C. But in California, in my time, you would fly Nixon. I actually flew Kissinger quite a few times in California, and we used our very fancy, dressed up, waxed, cushy interior CH-46s. And so I was going crazy being back in the United States, and I kept requesting to go back to Japan or Asia, anywhere. And they did. And they sent me back after, I don't remember, 6-7 months, and I went back. And I got stationed then in Okinawa. HMM 164 was the squadron I was stationed in. Now, at that point, I had grown quite a reputation, because here's the thing, I was not a very good Marine. I was not spit and polished. I never cut my hair when it was supposed to. I was too independent for my own good. I was too anti-authority. And if I had not been really good at my job, and that was intentional, I knew that. So I made a point to be the best possible at my job, that I would get some slack cut for some of the sloppiness of my Marine personality. I like a lot of us, it's like, why are we here? Well, I'd volunteered, but I was going to be drafted. So I figured it was a forced issue. And I loved travel. And at the time, I didn't really appreciate what the Marine Corps did, because there's a lot of things that just feel very unfair when you're in there. Of course, the Marine Corps isn't about fairness. I was young, so I didn't know any better. So I was not a very good Marine, but I overcame that issue and got my good conduct medals every 3 years. I think it was assigned, whatever it was. I mean, I never got in any kind of serious trouble. Only one time was I called on the carpet, and a small entry was put in my record book, and it was actually completely out of line. It should never have happened, but it's just the way it goes. Maybe I'll tell that story someday. But whenever I should have gotten in trouble, something always saved me. As a matter of fact, my entire time in the Marine Corps, I came to believe that I was invincible and vulnerable, that whatever it was, I was going to be fine. Not a very realistic point of view, but I had that feeling. So here we are in the latter half of 1976, and I'm a crew chief, and I'm back in a squadron overseas. I'm stationed in Okinawa, which is awesome, by the way. Loved Okinawa, and assigned to a particular helicopter. And so it was mine. You know, I'm a crew chief, and so that helicopter is mine. And when the pilot would come, he could choose or be assigned to whatever helicopter for that particular flight. So maybe he's going to go out for 2 hours to do whatever. We were like a pool. So a pool of helicopters, and the pilot would choose. Well, I was so good at my job, it became very well known, and I got a reputation actually beyond what I probably deserved. And all the pilots wanted to choose my helicopter. Well, that brought a lot of benefits. And so I could get away with some of the things that I did. So we're going to pick up on, I was picked with 4 others to have my helicopter fly down to the Philippines from Okinawa. Now, this would entail, in history, in any country, the longest overwater flight for a helicopter that ever happened. Except at the time, for whatever reason, they considered it secret. So it should have been a Guinness Book of World Records thing. I don't even know if it's been done since, but we did it. So if you look on the map, what we did was we flew from Okinawa to Taiwan, Taipei, and then we flew to the southern end of Taiwan to get our last refuel, top it off. We had 2 internal tanks, and from there we flew to Poro Point in the Philippines, which is a little Air Force fueling station. There was no runway. It was just grass fields, and there was small barracks. It was a very small operation. There was a barber shop and a tiny little PX. It was more like a country store kind of thing, and an administration building and fuel tanks. So that was about it. And you could find Poro Point on if you look Google map at the top northernmost of the Philippines. And so we flew that overwater flight. Now, it was interesting because got to fly to Taiwan. I'd never been to Taiwan. That was very cool. And as a matter of fact, what brought this memory up was the other day I was trying to find a document, and I'm digging, I'm hunting through everything. And I opened up this folder, and I carried this folder with me here to South America. Don't even know why. There was some things I just threw in a bag. They didn't take up much room. And this was from the Marine Corps. And this is what I found. Let me show you here. This was the orders. And if you see that blue circle at the bottom, it says admitted. That was to Taiwan. This was my orders to that 4 helicopter detachment to go to the Philippines. So I'd run into this, and then I started remembering things. So it was kind of cool. So I'm thinking about this stuff, and the more I thought about it, the more I remembered, and it started kind of fleshing out. So all of this I'd completely forgotten. This triggered, and then it's like I thought about it, and then I go, oh, you know what? I remember this. Oh, I remember this. And it just kept building. It went on for about 2 days, and it was pretty cool. It was fun to remember these things. And the whole point of this 4 helicopter detachment was to support a group of recon rangers that were doing survival. It was a survival. I guess you'd say training or refresher. These are already. There were full recon rangers. Recon rangers are like Green Beret or Navy SEALs. They're all in the same kind of category, and these were for the Marines. And so maybe a refresher. I'm not exactly sure, but they maybe actually I think, and I'm remembering now, it's something they have to requalify in every so often, and that's what it was. So it wasn't a training thing. So for a month we had to support them doing this, which would mean flying them out over a jungle and letting them rappel down, and then they would hike back, and then we'd fly another group at night. One of those night flights was really here. It was really windy, and we only had a small area for them to go down. One of them actually, the helicopter lurched with a gust of wind, and he actually fell off the rappel rope and broke his leg. There was no way for us to get him up. It was like down into a canopy. So basically, they hiked him out. But that's the kind of stuff that was going on. So we're dropping supplies here and there, just running support. And during that month, my helicopter was the only helicopter that met every mission. See, helicopters are very unreliable, particularly back in that time. We had a hard time getting spare parts. We would actually, our squadron had 3 or 4 helicopters that we would steal parts off of. They were our parts supply. And eventually, there was one time every helicopter for our squadron flew. And I got a picture of that. But it was the only time in years that had happened, because we always had to cannibalize for parts. So here we flew down to Taiwan. I told a story previously about me waking up in a special circumstance with a girl I had never seen before. I'm not going to retell that story. But flying to Taiwan, having a couple days to regroup, because getting ready for this, I went something like 3 or 4 days without any sleep preparing for this flight. And so when I got to Taiwan, I crashed big time. I slept a ton, but we had a few days to kind of regroup, and then we flew to Tainan, which was really cool because it's it was a big city. It was kind of an isolated city. Nobody had ever seen us gringos before, and there was a lot of stories to tell there. It was kind of fun, but we only had a couple days there, and then the big flight. The big, dangerous flight, because it's not unusual for these helicopters to just kind of fall out of the sky. So the longer you're flying them in one shot, the more likely you're going to have an issue. Less so today, but then it was certainly I'd had a number of friends who had died in helicopter crashes, who had been in helicopter crashes and survived. Up until that point, I had not been, although on the way back I did. So I'll talk about that a little bit. The good story is actually a little later in this. This will be a long episode here. Okay, so flying to the Philippines. I can recall, are we there yet? Are we there yet? No, I wasn't doing that, but it was maddening, because it felt like this flight's never going to end. And we were on fumes. And you don't want to go down in that part of the world, in that ocean, because it's full of sharks. There's a real issue there. And it was a concern, because this had never been done before. And we had flown with a certain separation. So it's not like we flew down in formation. Like they would go, and 10 minutes later, I'd go. 10 minutes later, somebody else would go. So we're kind of staggered going down. I don't recall why. There was a reason. I just don't remember what it was. And so we got there, landed in the Philippines at Poro Point, refueled, and then flew down to Subic Bay. There's an air station there, and we flew down there. And then we did the 4-month thing. And it was interesting, because when I wasn't flying, I got to roam around the Philippines. which was very depressing. And I've told stories about that. The poverty was just smothering. I used to have nightmares about being in the Philippines. And then there was a monkey episode, which I've told that before. The monkeys there are deadly. They have arm strength like more than Josh Allen, and they would throw rocks. I was in the back of a pickup truck going down to the flight line, coming down off this hill to the flight line, and a monkey threw a rock that hit the side of the pickup truck bed and caved the entire side in. And it was so freaking loud. These guys were dangerous. They had huge teeth, not good. So I do the episode. So I get through this event as the only helicopter that met every mission, as I mentioned. Let me step back. I mentioned how I felt I was invulnerable, that nothing could touch me, that I could get away with anything and somehow walk out the other side better than I went in. I don't know how to describe it, but I was an arrogant asshole. I had a white silk scarf. I have no idea why. When people would ask me what I did for a living, I'd tell them I cheat death. Here's a picture of me standing outside my helicopter. And the reason I'm going to show you this, I had to clean it up because it's an old picture. So I had AI just kind of take some of the fuzziness out of it. And it barely altered it. Now, you see the S there. That actually didn't have a peak on it. AI threw that in. It actually was flat at the top. And that S. Now, my first mechanic, who is my aircrew helper, I had him the night before paint that S. Superman, indestructible, made every mission, set in within Marine Corps in helicopters, set some records about how many hours I was able to fly and never be down for some kind of breakage or maintenance or something. And so, being the cocky person I was, I had him paint that Superman S on there because I'm indestructible. Now, if you take a look at me, that is me. There's two changes here that AI made because the original picture was pretty bad. It's all actually really good, except the hat was gold wings, not silver. And that oval arm patch was actually an American flag. American flag is not something that was supposed to be on these flight suits back then. I put it just because I was cocky. That hat, that's very far from being a regulation hat. I went into, this was in Okinawa, I went into town to a seamstress. They've got these little tiendas like here in South America. And I had her take a baseball cap and I think I put the frequent wind operation on the side and something else. And on the front, I had her put my aircrew wings on there. Completely non-regulation, but I wore it because nobody would bother me because I was good at my job. They just chalked it up to that's the way I was. And that was fine. So that's setting the stage of the night before we're going to fly back to Okinawa on the same route that we came down. So we leave the Subic Bay and fly up to Poro Point where we're going to top off. And we're kind of circling in, getting ready to land. The other helicopters already landed and we were the last one. And at 500 feet, the helicopter rotors desynced. Now, this was a tandem rotor, and the blades would have to kind of mix, think like a cake mixer, they'd have to synchronize. Well, it didn't. And so the blades hit each other, and blades are flying off at 500 feet, and we dropped like a rock because there was no lift. And once all was said and done, here is a picture of when that happened. And you'll see that the hatches are kind of blown off, and you can't really see very well in this picture, but there's oil all over it. And if you look at the front, you'll see there's a little stub where a rotor blade should be coming out of, but it wasn't. That was completely gone. And then on the back, you'll see that thing hanging way down. Well, that's because it crushed. Oh, I got that upside down. How did I do that? Well, you can still see that thing is crushed. So what happened was the back, which would be like this, was crushed down like that. Because when it hit, helicopter just kind of broke in half. And the engines in the engine bay, kind of heavy back there, and the transmission, all that kind of stuff, just broke the helicopter in half. And of course, being invulnerable, I was perfectly fine. I didn't have a bruise or a scratch on me, which is pretty amazing. So from there, everybody flies back. All the other people, my first mechanic goes in another helicopter. I stayed. And I was issued, whoop, not that. Nope. Got to hear something. Here we go. This was TAD, temporary duty assignment. And it reads, you are authorized posting to Poro Point in the Philippines due to aircraft accident. They told me to stay for the accident investigation. And that was a rough time for me in the Marine Corps because I knew what had happened. It's something that I'd already had experience with. I mentioned that I had a friend die in an accident and other friends who had been in accidents. One that had been in an accident and one that had died in an accident had the same issue. And so when the people arrived, there were two of them. One was a colonel, and I think the other was a major. So pretty good rank. And they came there, and we looked over the helicopter. We were not to talk to each other about what we're looking at. So we looked and made our own notes and stuff. And then we go back and sit down and have a little meeting, and we would discuss what we individually would find. And they found the same thing, which was a non-issue. It not only wasn't going to cause a crash, it was normal. I pointed out, based on, I knew what to look for right away, and sure enough, there it was, broken, because of my prior experience with this, knowing that this was an issue. And reports had already been filed on this, but nothing had ever come of it. And they argued with me for a little bit, and then they basically ordered me to drop it. And the reasoning was pathetic. It was because if we found that dampener had cracked, and not only that, but had other instances of this happening, the dampener is like the shock absorber that holds that blade, because there's a lot of pressure, wind, and things like that. So the blade actually doesn't just have a rotational movement, it has a lead lag movement kind of slopping around, and you have to dampen that. So it's like this massive shock absorber. And if that thing cracks and leaks or blows a seal or something like that, it no longer is dampened. It can slap back and forth real hard, which can actually break it out of that housing and lose the blade. And that's exactly what happened. And I knew that's what happened. And when I went and looked, sure enough, that's exactly what I was seeing. So I was ordered not to ever bring this up again. And I was really pissed about it because I got to fly in these helicopters. Neither of these guys were pilots. They had some engineering background in aviation, so it's not like they were not qualified, but they came in with a specific agenda, became obvious to me. And the agenda was so that if it was what I told them it was, and if that went into the report, it would have required a mandatory grounding of helicopters throughout the Marine Corps, an inspection of every single one, 6 on each helicopter, and would require parts replacement that they didn't have and would take forever to manufacture and get those parts. In the meantime, we have daily missions all over the world requiring these helicopters. And so they weren't going to ground the helicopter, despite the fact that helicopters were crashing over this. They did, over the course of the next few years, rectify the problem one at a time, squadron at a time, on a whole different time scale. So not that it was urgent. I became very bitter over that incident, and if I wasn't already disillusioned, I was a little bit more. But while I was there waiting for them to show up, I had a couple weeks, and there was no place to keep me at that little air station. So right next door is this little Philippine village. And this little Philippine village had this hotel, beautiful hotel, that apparently somebody had built for visitors to that air station. And so they put me in there. And the front of the hotel was actually the Pacific Ocean. And there was a beach with cabanas, and it was awesome. And I had a running tab there. Everything was cheap anyway, but it was all on the Marine Corps. So I got to kick back and have my coconut pina coladas or whatever they're on the beach. There were beautiful girls running all over the place. So there was only probably 100 people in this village, but I think they imported women in. I'm guessing, but it was basically a 2-week vacation. Then they showed up, did the accident report, and then I was done. They flew me back to Okinawa, which was pretty cool. It was in a Learjet, one of those little personal size Learjets. I think it had 8 armchair cushy. These are for generals. And there was one leaving the Philippines, and so they flew me back in that. I was flown down by helicopter to the air station, got on that Learjet, and then they flew me right back to Okinawa. So that was pretty cool. So now we're getting to the actual story. That's all the lead up. So the actual story was another independent assignment. Now, if you think about it, so far through the last half of 1976, it was either independent or very small, lacking over authority over my head kind of duties. 4 helicopters down in the Philippines. I didn't really have a boss there. I mean, I was the boss of my own flight schedule. And there was nobody really over me. It's not like they sent down a whole administrative bureau. I didn't have anybody to report to. I just had to show up for my job. And then for the accident investigation, I was certainly alone for a certain period of time. So I go back to Okinawa, and I barely got my feet back on the ground when I get handed another duty assignment. And this duty assignment was, and actually, I didn't put it up here. I actually have the orders for that too. But the duty assignment was this. Now, CH-46 helicopters, like these tandem rotor ones like that, or like the thumbnail. Let's see, the thumbnail. Like that. That's more like it. There you could see the rear rotor, how upright it is. Okay, so you have certain levels of maintenance. your squadron can perform certain things. But if it's something your squadron can't really perform, if it's not something that can be done really within a day or two, then it gets bumped up to depot maintenance. And then if it can't be done depot maintenance, then it goes back to Boeing. We had a helicopter in that squadron that I just arrived at. We had a helicopter that had a lot of corrosion. Now, most of the airframe is aluminum, but aluminum, contrary to what some people think, it does corrode. It's this white powder. And you don't want to have your airframe corroded. That's a no-no. That can be bad. And so we had one that had a certain amount of corrosion, and you can handle small bits of it at a squadron level, but this had it throughout. So it actually had to be a fair amount of it disassembled in order to locate corrosion that you couldn't see visually, plus the stuff that you could see. And so they decided to send this helicopter to Japan. Now, in Atsugi, Japan, there is by a Boeing license, a factory where Japan is licensed to build the CH-46 helicopter. And they build them for themselves, for their military, for their version of Coast Guard, search and rescue, things like that. And so they made arrangements for this helicopter to go there, depot level maintenance. And for what, either they're trying to get rid of me or didn't have a place for me, and I don't think that's actually the case, but it's funny to say that. But when I got back, they assigned me to that helicopter to go to Japan and stay until it was finished. We're talking weeks. And which was fine with me, but I'm saying, why? I ask why. Because I didn't just accept things like you're supposed to. And the why was because I could speak Japanese, and I was fairly fluent. I was conversational Japanese. And according to many Japanese that I had met along the way, said that I actually didn't even have an accent. They were kind of amazed because Americans didn't bother learning Japanese back in the 60s and 70s. So they said that I would go in case there was any kind of interaction that needs to take place. Okay, fine. So they give me a bunch of maintenance manuals and they send me. Now, if you think about it, this is really stupid because they're sending me to a place where they actually build these helicopters. They didn't need me for anything. All I had to do, but they already had a report, is to point out the areas of corrosion that we saw. Didn't matter. They knew. I got there. They were very polite, thanked me for showing up. They've got all the books in the world because they build these things. They didn't need me. So they said, don't call us, we'll call you. When we're ready, we'll let you know. So here I am in Japan with nothing to do, no one to report to, no place to go really. So I went to the nearest base. Don't recall. It was near Yokohama, near Atsugi. I don't recall the name of it was an Air Force base. And I checked in with them because you don't want to get in trouble. I wasn't really sure what to do. And I showed them the orders that I had. And they said, well, we don't have anything for you. You're welcome to use our building. You're welcome to use our barracks while you're here. So, okay, that's cool. And so they were special barracks. They weren't your normal barracks, but they were kind of weird. The building was kind of nice, but you walk down this hallway and there's all these little doors near each other. And I go into my room, and it's a room about the size of a closet. I mean, it's got a bed there. It's got enough room to stand alongside. It's what I would picture a jail cell would be. It was really small. It wasn't bad. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was just really tiny. So I didn't really want to stay there, although I did a couple times, but I had all this free time. They also told me that I could report back for paydays and they could issue, I forget, there was a word for it, but there was a way that they could issue me my pay right from that Air Force base. And so I said, okay, I'll see you in a couple of weeks. I get paid every 2 weeks back then. So I decided to first go down to Yokohama and check it out. And that was very cool. Everywhere I went, because I could speak Japanese, I could gather friends. I could gather all kinds of people. I got a stack of business cards from those weeks that I was there because it was typical for people to give you a business card, kind of like what it used to be here. And I got stacks of them because I met so many people. There was a place called Shakey's Pizza. It was a U.S. brand, and you get pizza and beer. And it was a very popular place for young people. And I was a young person back then. And so I would go there. I knew Shakey's, so I would go there, and I met all these Japanese people that would kind of gather around. I would use Japanese maybe to order or whatever. And people would hear that and they would just kind of congregate with a million questions. It was a lot of fun. Met a couple girlfriends that way. But then I decided I want to check out Tokyo. So my next paycheck came. I went up and got it by train, came back by train, then went to Tokyo. And in Tokyo, I stayed at it was an Army hotel. It was for officers generally. This hotel was as nice as any 4 or 5-star hotel you've ever seen. It was awesome. You had people, but it was Army. So the rate I got for it was, I don't even remember, but it was crazy cheap. Huge room. Really nicely well equipped, very fancy room. Thing had probably been built back in 1946 or 47, sometime back then. It was awesome. So I got to stay there, and I got to go around and explore Tokyo, and that was fantastic. But what I didn't tell you is the flight up to bring that helicopter up for all that to happen. So here we are flying from Okinawa up to Japan. Now, it's not huge. A lot of it's over water, of course, because Okinawa is an island south of Japan. So we're flying up there, but it was pretty uneventful. And we're flying along the coast because everything's on kind of the right side of Japan. Yokohama, Atsugi, Tokyo, everything's there. But the landscape is very rocky, very craggy. That coastline, it's pretty rugged. So we're flying along, and we had an internal tank because it was a long enough flight to not just the stub wings, the little things on the side, but you need those fiberglass internal tanks. Well, we start running out of fuel because the transfer wasn't happening. So I'm scrambling around trying to find it. There was a circuit breaker that kept popping for the internal transfer. So in other words, as it gets to a certain level, it just automatically kicks on. Well, it's not kicking on. It's not working. There's nothing I can actually do about it flying. So here we are running out of fuel. And we're looking down and say, we run out of fuel. There's no place to set this thing down. There's no place to land. This is unlandable. It's just craggy rocks. So we just kept looking. Hope we find something before we have to set this thing down because there's no more fuel. So we get to this little fishing village. and there's a main street. The main street is kind of like a small 2-lane road, but it's paved. And so we find a spot, there's trees and stuff, but we see a spot that's kind of clear, and it's next to a small group of houses. So we set it down there, right down in the middle of their main street. We set this helicopter down. And it was quite an event. Every policeman in the area came. I guess there was like 50 houses in this little village. So it's a very small population. But there were, according to the newspaper accounts, there were 40 to 60 little kids that came and surrounded us. And that sounds about right. There was tons of them. And I don't know, we were having a good time with it. We didn't crash. We were happy. That would have been bad. And having a place to land made us very cheerful. And so all these people came out. You know, when we landed, there was nothing, but all these people just kept coming out of the woodwork, you know, and all these kids, and the kids, they were climbing up on the stub wing, and they were giving them tours inside the helicopter, and it was a lot of fun. And then these women came, and they were carrying these little snacks for us. Their snacks, they weren't sweet. They were snacks, but they weren't sweet snacks. But there was the equivalent of sweet. So they didn't have, in the very conservative old part of Japan that existed back in that time, kind of the way it had been for hundreds of years. Their snacks weren't really very sweet, but they were pretty good, and it was pretty cool. They're bringing this stuff out. And then the newspaper came, they're taking pictures, and at one point they asked me to sit on the stub wing. Well, after we landed, I went outside, check everything. We're good. We got clearance and chalk the wheels. I go back in, and I'm trying to fix this problem. So I'm trying to track it down. Is there a circuit breaker I could steal from something else? And so I'm going through that. And in the meantime, the police came, and they were trying to talk to the other people in the crew. There were 2 others, and they didn't speak Japanese. The other guys, they didn't speak any Japanese. And I'm inside trying to fix this thing. And then a local mechanic, or the local gas station or whatever, but he said he was a car mechanic or a truck mechanic or something. So he came. And so I explained to him what was going on. And I asked if he could find me a big long hose, because my thinking is, I don't know that I can get this fixed here. It's not looking good. We didn't really even have any tools with us. So I want to siphon from the fiberglass tank inside, which is sitting here, to the stub wing, which is sitting here. I want to siphon, just like you siphon gas, and stick it into the stub wing, fill the stub wing up, we're good to go. And he knew right away. He was on it. He understood me, and he bolted. He ran off. And so then somebody came and told me about the cops, and they seemed to be kind of irate, and so they called me over. And so I explained what had happened, what was going on. And they were being kind of official. It's like, I think they were loving the attention. Here's a small town. This never happened, never in anyone's life, probably never again. A story they tell their great grandchildren about how the American helicopter landed in their town and how they saved us. I'm sure that's the case. And the police are being very official. And before we could leave, they needed to determine if we should be cited for blocking traffic. And actually, even though it's the main road, I don't recall there was one car that ever came along while we were there. It's not like everybody had cars. I think cars were few and far between. But this was a road that ran into other towns. So they're trying to determine. I explained what's going on. It was kind of funny because we're going to leave. It's like, we get this fixed, we're leaving. But you have to be very mindful to not be as rude and arrogant as I tend to be. Although I was very well behaved. I really enjoyed what was going on, and we made good communication. Now, which is funny. So to prove my case, these were newspaper clippings. One of those, these are two of them. And one of these is from a national newspaper. And I don't know if you could see the outline, but it's pictures. It's the same picture in each one of all the people and kids around and the helicopter sitting there in the street. I was given this by the Public Affairs Office for the Marine Corps. After this is all said and done, I got back from my duty assignment. So months later, they had saved this for me. And here was the translation, PAO, Public Affairs Office translation. And here's one of the newspaper articles. They didn't quite have it right. They said that we didn't communicate, although someone came along who could speak English. Well, that was actually me. And it's funny, they sent me to help with Japanese for the helicopter, which was totally not needed. But in this case, it was very useful. And so this was quite an episode. It was quite an event. We made the television news. We were in the newspapers. For Japan, it was a major thing. And then, of course, the mechanic brought the hose. Siphoning the hose worked fine, only bothered filling up the one side. We didn't have that much farther to go. And so we started up. All the kids ran back. I had to make sure everybody stood back, get back. I had to draw a line, tell them, stay behind this line. And so we fired up the police. They're getting in the spirit of it, and they were stern through a fair amount of this, where everybody else it was like a carnival. It was like a festival was going on. It was a lot of fun, but the police were very stern and they weren't sure. And I'm convinced that they wanted to look very official to the townspeople. They weren't going to try. They didn't want to let us get away with anything. But in the end, they waved and we were on our way. And so then I got there and reported in, and they didn't need me, sent me off to Tokyo. I had a great time. I had, weeks. I think I was somewhere, I actually don't remember, but I think it was somewhere around 8 to 12 weeks. I ended up having all that free time. Now, there's some events that happened while I was in Tokyo. I was chased by the KGB. There was all kinds of things. When that movie Forrest Gump came out, it was like an Army infantry version of Marine Corps aviation me. Because in my time in the Marine Corps, so many things happened, so many things occurred that is just kind of unbelievable. And that's why there's so many things that even a big thing like this, I completely had forgotten. I didn't forget the crash. I knew about that, but I completely forgotten about running out of fuel and all those kids and all of that. And it just it was all in a fog, and it just started kind of clearing up, and I remember more and more detail with it. And so it was very cool. My service, by the time I was done, I had my wings. I had some various airlift, frequent wind, good conduct medal, different things. My rifle expert 5 times. I did it 6 times, but my first time I kind of sucked. I was sharpshooter, the 2nd level. Expert's the 3rd level. And so I kind of messed up the first time. and then my pistol expert and my E5 sergeant, and that one stripe there, that diagonal stripe on the right side, that's your hash stripe. It's you get one for every 4 years. Now I was in a little over 6 years, so I only got one. So that's it. That encompasses about a 4-month period of time while I was in the Marine Corps. Like I say, it was after about 4 years of being in the Marine Corps. That was fun, exciting. People, while I was in the Marine Corps, I kept getting asked, why do you keep wanting to be over here? You've been here for years now. Why would you want to do that? Because so many people went there and hated it, couldn't wait to get back. And for me, I got an apartment off base, and I learned the language, and I had girlfriends, and I would go out and go to concerts, and I just really lived a separate life there, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But even my Marine Corps life, all these independent episodes of excitement. You know, you crash, you live, you're in this independent duty, you get to explore the Philippines, and you've got nobody to account to. You don't have to get up at 5. Well, actually, I was getting up at 3 or 4 in the morning, but I didn't have somebody there requiring I get up at a certain time and report. And I didn't have to go for months. I was basically free to just do my job or hang out and have fun. So that part of those 6+ years were amazing times. From 75 to early 77, it was really quite amazing. All right, so that's all I got for today. I've done my due diligence of recording. I don't have any live chat from anyone. That's very sad. I can never seem to pick up live chats. But I did see a bunch of people stopped in, to see what's going on and left, and that's cool. I appreciate it. So watch time counts too. And so that's it. We're going to end it here. Thank you for being here. I will see you next time, especially this Sunday. And ciao.